In today's video, we're going to be talking about the breaking news of the 186 banks that are on the verge of collapse. These banks have asked the FDIC to raise the insurance limit to unlimited. So they want to raise it from $250,000 per account to unlimited. So that spells trouble ahead. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Thank you for being here, and please consider liking and subscribing if you find value. So as we all know, we had the second and third biggest U.S. banking collapse in U.S. history. In Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Valley Bank, together they had $300 billion in assets, most of which were not FDIC insured. So the Fed had to step in this past week and bail them out with $300 billion worth of stimulus. So specifically in this video, I want to discuss the double-edged sword that the Fed is facing and what to expect in the coming weeks and months ahead. On one hand, the Fed has put their foot down and said over and over again that they will not stop until inflation reaches 2%. They've made progress towards that goal. They've gotten inflation from 9% down to 6%. So they're making progress. The Fed's also been engaging in quantitative tightening. They've essentially taken out $1 trillion out of the U.S. economy. It took them 1 year to take that $1 trillion out and engage in quantitative tightening. In order to bail out these two banks over the past week, the Fed approved $300 billion in lines of credit to save these banks and make depositors whole. So after taking out $1 trillion over 1 year, they've pumped back $300 billion in a week. So a third of their progress has been reversed. So just to be honest, I don't envy the Fed. I don't envy Jerome Powell. They're put in an impossible situation and a classic double-edged sword. So on one hand, they want to raise rates, engage in quantitative tightening, and get inflation down to 2%. If they continue to do that without bailing out the banks, these 186 banks that are in trouble, we're going to see a financial collapse the size of 2008 or probably even worse. Now, this is not meant to scare you or cause panic. These are just the facts, and this is the reality of the financial crisis that we're facing dead on. On the other hand, the Fed can step in and they could bail out these banks like they did over the past week. And as we just saw, they pumped $300 billion in just a matter of a couple days. So how much more money will the Fed need to print to bail out 50, 100, or 186 banks? Now, granted, these 186 banks may not be as big as Silicon Valley or Signature Bank, but we're talking a very large number of banks, and we're not talking just one or two. We're talking 100 to almost 200 banks that would need to be bailed out. The amount of money that the Fed would need to pump would be in the trillions. And if we just think back, when was the last time something like that happened? Oh yeah, it was just a couple years ago during the COVID pandemic. So here's a little fact for you guys to think about for just a second. So according to NASDAQ.com, during COVID, the Fed engaged in quantitative easing to the tune of $4.5 trillion. Just to put that in perspective, if we adjust the cost of World War II for inflation in today's money, World War II would have cost the US $4.7 trillion. So we spent as much money and did as much quantitative easing during COVID as World War II. So let that sink in for a minute. So if these 186 banks fail and the Fed bails them out and pumps trillions of dollars into the economy, we're going to see inflation soar back up again. So again, the Fed is put in an impossible situation. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. So in my opinion, they have no choice. They have to bail out these banks. They cannot let 186 banks collapse. That would cause way too much panic, and it's just not something the Fed would ever consider, or the government would ever consider letting happen. So in my opinion, we're gonna see trillions pumped into the economy. So what's that going to mean for you and me and the average American folks? So if you're sitting on cash and you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're going to be faced with crippling inflation. Your dollar will not go as far as it did in the past, and the rate of the wage increases, if you're a wage earner, is not going to keep up with inflation. If you own assets like stocks, retirement, 401k, crypto, or real estate, your assets will once again, like during the COVID pandemic, be hyperinflated because of all the money that's being printed, and most of that is going to be artificial. So as I mentioned in my previous video, which I'll leave in the link up here and also in the description, these banks collapsing is the perfect advertisement for Bitcoin. This is exactly why Bitcoin was created after the financial crisis of 2008. The purpose was to take the money out of the hands of the banks. When you have your money in a bank, it's essentially being handled by a few people at the top. And if they don't make the right decisions, banks collapsing like they did over the past week and the 186 that are in trouble, that's what happens. Because you have a select few people making decisions with hundreds of billions of dollars of your money and my money that's sitting in the bank. So when you have your money in Bitcoin, you hold it in your hands. It's safe from a bank collapse and it's protected against inflation. That's the thing about Bitcoin. You can't engage in quantitative tightening or quantitative easing with Bitcoin. It's on an algorithm and it's deflationary. There's only 21 million that will ever exist and it can never be manipulated. The Fed is constantly going to manipulate the flow of money. That can never happen with Bitcoin. It's a fixed amount. There will only be 21 million and it can never be manipulated. And unfortunately, the word that you're going to keep hearing in the next week or two or in the coming months is going to be hyperinflation. I hope that doesn't happen because that would be catastrophic for the US and the average folks across the country. For the average American, it's going to be crippling. So just to be clear, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not telling you to buy Bitcoin, but this is a crucial time in history and you need to do your own research. You need to listen to every side of the argument and you need to get educated. So this coming week, we have a very important FOMC meeting and my prediction is we're probably going to see more bank collapse news. So we'll see how many banks actually go under. We'll see what happens to the FDIC, what they do in response to the banks asking for unlimited insurance. I don't see how that's possible. So again, please do your research, get informed. The trajectory of our financial world is being flipped upside down. So do your research, get educated, listen to all sides of the argument. Don't just listen to me or one other person. Listen to every side of the argument. Your family, your kids, and your future depends on it. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you guys in the next video.